Just keep swimming. Wise words, but who said them? Dory is described as the aquatic Good Samaritan. A Disney fan page says her optimism proves an invaluable quality to help overcome the impossible. But she's an odd partner for such a quest, much like some of us. Why Dory? One, I love animations. I think the child inside you has died if you do not love animations. And two, I think she can actually show us a lot about God's character and the character we need to strive for in our own spiritual lives.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Oh,
Dory.
I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
So that to me is a representation of God versus us. Might be a little bit strange, but to me, God is Dory pulling us through to the darkness, telling us it's gonna be okay, trying to help us, and we're like Marlin, just sitting there like, oh God, like why me? Why am I in this situation? Like, I don't want to be here. Honestly, can we all relate to being grumpy gills at some point in our lives? I think yes. Meanwhile, God's there, nudging us forward, encouraging us like a cheerleader, just being like, you can do it, you've got this, I'm with you, I'm here every single step of the way. He moves us forward when we're stuck. There are 3 stages in my journey with God so far that I've dealt with. They repeat themselves and there's no particular order, but 1, there's the low stage, when you're down in the dumps, you're in the pits. Then there's the high stage where you're like an Energizer bunny, just bouncing off the walls. As Adventists say, you're on fire for God. You've got that passion, you're burning. And the most recent stage that I've come across is the stagnant stage, where I'm just chilling, just in the swamp, just looking around like, all right guys, sup Shrek, like how's it going? There's not really much happening. That's the stage I've come across recently, and I'd like to talk to you a bit more about in a second. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, I'm going to share a bit about my story with you. I'm going to focus on the time period of now, back until August 2019. That date was, or that month was really important in my life, and you'll learn why soon enough. Anything you need to know beyond that period is just that I had massive anxiety issues as I was an adolescent. So I love controlling and I love planning. That's really the only piece of information that you really need to know. But anxiety is fear plus imagination. And I've got a really good imagination. I don't know about you guys. So I've got a really good level of anxiety to go with that. Context, 2018 highlight reel. 1, first big heartbreak. 2, loss of about 15 of my good friends. 3, I graduated. That's a fun fact. Or is it? Because I never actually used that degree, and that's just 30k down the bin, down the toilet, whatever way you want to look at it. But you know, God's got plans for everything. I also had the idea where I wanted to be a volunteer. I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to go into the Pacific and serve my time. Really, if I'm being honest with myself, I was chucking a Jonah and I was running straight for the hills because my life was crumbling around me and I no longer had a plan. So, obviously, as somebody who struggles with anxiety, not great when you don't have a plan. And God likes to work best, I feel, when we don't have plans. So, my plan was to move to an atoll. Not an island, an atoll. They are practically just sandbanks in the ocean, waiting for one wave to knock them out. Obviously not literally, because people have houses and they live there and, you know, that's great. But my plan was to volunteer there for a year. The only thing that put me off was that it costs $5,000 to get in and get out. So if something happened and I wanted to come home, I couldn't. And there was not many options. I messaged the SPD volunteer people and, you know, like it just wasn't coming back great. So I personally think that God used my anxieties to get me out of that situation because, yeah, I just wouldn't have coped. And this Bible verse has been with me since I was 13, and it's gotten me through a lot of times with my anxieties. And in Matthew 6:34 it says, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And if any of you struggle with anxiety, that's something I want you to keep close to your heart, that you don't need to worry. God's got it. It's not in your control. So just keep swimming. Now, let's move to 2019. Recap. I have no plan. I'm no longer going overseas. I'm just chilling. I end up having a job. I work for 2 schools for about 8 months, and the only thing I could do in this season of my life was to turn to prayer. I had to trust God. I had to be patient. It wasn't easy. I felt defeated in every aspect of my life, and now I suddenly, after finishing school, after finishing uni, for the first time ever, I didn't know where I was going. But in Romans 12:12 it says, "Constantly rejoicing in hope, because of our confidence in Christ, steadfast and patient in distress, devoted to prayer, continually seeking wisdom, guidance, and strength." Now, if you haven't read Romans chapter 12 verses 9 to 21, I highly implore you to do so, as I've labeled it Marks of a True Christian, and I have it stuck on my wall. I think it's a really great verse for something that we should all aspire to be. So what was I praying for? Now, this isn't the list I was praying for back then, but it's actually got a lot of similar items on it, and it's a more recent list. I wrote a list. I gave God instructions, very specific ones, on what I needed and what I wanted to be able to get through this next phase of my life. So I asked for a car, and I had a set price limit. Mine had been stolen about a year before, and so I was pretty much in need of one. I wanted a job that I was passionate about, and I wanted to move out on my own and have it be obviously affordable. In Sydney, that's not always possible. So in the meantime, like I said, I was working for the schools. I was working at Mountain View and at Auburn, and I was doing that for about 8 months on a casual basis, but pretty much full time. On my lunch breaks with Mountain View, that's when I first met my counsellor, and I would see her once a week on my lunch breaks, and we would just chat, and I needed that. I needed that after everything. I had to get it all out, and I highly encourage you, if you're dealing with stuff, to go and see someone, find help. And she was actually the one who got the email that told me about the job at the SPD. During this time as well, I got the opportunity to run my first Imagine program, and I've now been leading that space for the last 2 or 3 years. I had the time to dedicate to it. I was also doing a lot of growing and learning and being molded for the next stage of my journey. God doesn't waste time. He doesn't use your periods where you feel like it's worthless for nothing. He's growing you, he's helping you in that period. So just be patient, like you'll see how he uses you at the end. So just keep swimming. So it's been 8 months and I've been praying, waiting for an answer. So we're back at that month, August 2019, and God's answering left, right, and center. Like, that's the best month. It's going down in history forever. So 1, I was baptized early August, and I shared my testimony in front of 600 people, plus Dad decided to live stream it on Facebook, so thousands more saw it after that. And I was somebody who was quite introverted in terms of my story and my personal struggles, so to share that in front of that many people was a big deal, and it started me getting over my fear of public speaking. Next, I had the job interview, and then eventually I got the job offer. I applied for 2 roles. I applied for the Discipleship Ministries team and also to work in the volunteers department. I was passionate about helping people, and I honestly had never heard of the SPD up until that point. But I got the job in Discipleship Ministries, and it was honestly one of the best roles God could have aligned me with for the time period I was heading into. Then I got a car. It was within my budget, and I needed it to get to work because where we live there's no public transport. And also I found somewhere to live. So luckily enough for me, my auntie's tenants were moving out while I was in Tasmania, taking a transition before I started my job. I found out that I could rent this place for an affordable price. I'd be close to family, closer to work, and God just had it all covered. So God's plan versus my plan. I've worked at the SPD for 2 years now. I've helped countless people in the South Pacific without stepping foot in any of the countries. I mean, that's God's sense of humor for sure. I went from a low, which was my plan, to a high, which was God's plan. And DMT helped me through a lot of, that's Discipleship Ministries team, helped me through a lot of my hard times, a lot of my struggles. They were nurturing, they were supportive, they had my back. It was an environment where I could learn but be surrounded by laughter and excitement, and there was so much opportunity for self-growth and personal or professional development. All of the above. It was within my reach within this team. So let's recap 2020. We went down, up, so goes the journey of every spiritual person ever. And it didn't end there. So when you get baptized, personally, I feel like that shoves a big target on your back saying, "Hi Satan, I'm here." It's neon, it's strobing, it's like, yeah, I'm coming for you. So began the hard times of 2020. As we all know, there was COVID, there was lockdowns, great times, love it. I'm sure a lot of us struggled through last year. And I also had, sadly, one of my high school friends pass away. And during this time, as well as mourning his loss, I was also reunited with old friends and ex-boyfriends and just people I hadn't seen and who were going to bring up a lot of feelings for me as well. I had another failed relationship, which was even harder than the first one, and family breakdowns. I was back in the counselor's office and I was just at another low. And I mean, after you go through one big one, you just think, why am I going through another one? Like, why am I here? And I think we can all relate that 2020 can just be chucked right out. I mean, some good parts, but you know, we just got to keep swimming. But it wasn't all bad. Once I let God in, it let the light back in. And there were great opportunities. I got to do my passion projects with Imagine. I got to do my first ever work trip. I was so excited. I mean, all I did was pop up to Gold Coast, but like still highlights. We did the Women in Ministry conference just before COVID hit in February 2020, and we were able to gather women from all around the Pacific in one room and spend a couple days together. It was great. I got to also be a co-editor of the book Called, and something I never ever thought I would do, honestly. I developed online courses, websites, I helped with resources, things I never dreamed of were possible in the last 2 years. So I was able to do all these things I had never dreamed of. And then I got this job offer recently, like in the last month. And I had a week to deliberate. It was a really hard decision. After lots of prayer and a little bit of stress, I felt God telling me that it was time for me to listen really closely, because he was going to give me the answer as a whisper and not as a shout. Personal preference, would have loved to yell, would have loved to, "Hey Shay, do this," but unfortunately for me, that's not the way that God saw it going. So I made the Excel spreadsheets, and that helped me decide that I was pretty concrete in the job I was in. It aligned with my focus and my passion at that time. So God needed me to listen better. He needed me to be close enough that he could whisper the answer to me. Even if I preferred a shout, even if I preferred the scream in my ear, he needed me to learn to listen closely and to know his voice, to know whom it is I was serving. Maybe you need to listen better too. Maybe you need to learn what God's voice sounds like, and then just keep swimming. So, what have I learnt from all of this in all my long, wise years being on this earth? It's not about the big choices. It's about being consistent with the small ones along the way that lead to the big ones. They're what you fall back on when things get tough, when you feel like you're breaking. You have that habit, that relationship with God that you can fall back on when you just don't think you've got it anymore. I'll give you an example. So baptism, big decision, shouldn't take it lightly. My hope is that you didn't take such a serious commitment to faith by waking up one morning, running into the first theology lecture you see, grabbing a theology student, popping into the Avondale pool and pronouncing yourself baptized. Before you get to the stage where you get baptized, you go through steps. You do Bible studies, you pray about it, you talk to some people about it, you plan it, because it's going to be one of the most fulfilling things you do, and it requires small choices along the way. So, what are simple steps you can take? What are small bite-sized steps that you can take? For me, it would be letting go of Netflix. Really hard one, actually. But I should be listening to a podcast instead, or reading a book, or listening to some gospel music. Honestly, opportunities, like, sky's the limit these days. There's so much out there. And life with God doesn't have to be boring. Find what works for you. There might be some island jams that were gospel related. There could be devotions that are on YouTube. There could be movies. You could dance and express yourself. I don't know what exactly works for you, but something has to fit. And if not, make it yourself. Get creative. Be innovators. But this leads me to Shay's nuggets of wisdom. So, sacrifice the small things so that you're able to sacrifice the big things. My life blows up when it's my choice, when I've looked at what I want and not consulted with God. So I've got to submit to his path. Proverbs 3:5-6, we all know. We've got to lean on his understanding. We've got to follow him. He's going to open so many doors to us when we do. So let him in. And God forgives us, so always come back. No matter what you've done, come back. Deuteronomy 4:30 says, when you're in distress and all these things happen to you, then you will finally come back to the Lord your God and obey him. And prayer is everything. I cannot stress prayer more. I don't think I used to take prayer seriously, but giving commitment to speak to God even on the hard days, even on the days where your prayer is as simple as, God, I'm here and this sucks. I don't know what the point is anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. He wants to be part of every single thing that you do. And life's a lot better when he is. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's better. So create a prayer space. I have one and I'll show you a photo of it. And I'll be honest, I'm not in it as often as I would like to be. I go through my stages, but I love looking at it. It gives me peace just to look at it in my room when I wake up in the morning. This is something I've tried to do with my team. I mentioned Imagine earlier, and lately we've been focusing a lot on prayer. So leading up to the program we did in May, we spent a month in prayer prior to the program. And that week before we started, each member of that team was attacked in some way, shape or form. But we were prepared because we were ready for battle. We knew he was going to come and we knew God was going to protect us. And we'd prayed for every element of that program and God covered it. That program was amazing. It was incredible. All glory to him though. We couldn't have done it on our own. And now that we're doing this social media push, we're now focusing again on prayer, on building our foundation in God. We spent 3 weeks at 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. every day praying over what we wanted to do in this space. We now have accountability buddies. So we're partnered up with someone and every 2 weeks we rotate and we share about our lives. So it's good for team building and it's also good to keep us grounded spiritually. Let people in to keep you accountable. It's okay to admit you can't do it on your own. Honestly, that's why we have God, because we can't do it on our own. And the next point is, don't follow the crowd. It's hard for young people. It really is. It's hard to separate yourself from the people that you care about when you can see that they're not good influences in your life. Surround yourself with people who will grow you and nurture you. Proverbs 27:17 is one of my mate's favorite verses, and it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one friend sharpens another. I lost all those friends, but I've gained so many new ones. People who share the same level of faith as me. People I never thought would have honestly been in my life. And that's what I prayed for 2 years ago. And God's answered in leaps and bounds to what I could have expected. And all of this now brings me back to the start when I was talking about our stagnant periods, being in the swamp. was a recent lesson. So my question is, how do you remain faithful when doing the motions and lacking the feeling, lacking the presence of God? You're there, you're sitting there, you're waiting, but you don't feel him. What do you do then? To me, maybe you've leveled up. Maybe you've grabbed that princess in whatever Mario game you're playing and you've gotten to the next stage. And God's like, all right, what are you going to do now? So you've got to adapt. You've got to find new ways to connect. You've got to combat it by digging deep, staying patient and constant in prayer, like it said in Romans 12:12. This is the hardest thing for me to do, honestly. But as you grow and develop your relationship with God, it's going to change just like any other relationship you could have. Think about a marriage. When you were first newlyweds, you didn't expect of your partner what you expect of them once you've had a kid. Things change. So you've got to find your groove again. It's going to take time, it's going to take trial and error, but eventually you'll get there. So it's not always about whole days. Sometimes it's just moments in time. You've got to take the small wins in order to get through the really hard, long, drawn out times. So, to me, it's easier to remember the hard patches. We tend to lean into the negative as humans. I find when I reach my stalemate with God, it feels like I was just there. And that needs to change. We need to stop leaning into the negative. We need to start being proactive and intentional about being positive, about choosing to be filled with joy and filled with hope. So write it down. Whenever something good happens to you, write it down. Put it somewhere where you're going to see it. Somewhere where you can look and you can be like, that's what inspires me. That's what motivates me. That's what lifts me up in the times where I'm really struggling. It could have been past answers to prayer. I don't know what it is. But whatever it is that brings you joy, write it down. Put it somewhere where you're going to see it. Revisit it when you're at your next low point or your stagnant period. Because I promise you, that high feeling is just around the corner. You've just got to keep swimming. So, tying it all together, the most important thing that I could tell you is keep it consistent. Consistency is everything. Now, I'm going to use an analogy of pancake batter. So, I'm sure we all love pancakes. Some of you might be protein pancake people, who knows? But whether it's thick or whether it's thin, a pancake is still formed. You might use different ingredients, you might use different recipes, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you make it and that you put whatever mixture it is into the fry pan and get it through that process. God doesn't have unrealistic expectations of you. You just got to show up. Whatever you have, big or small, just be willing to be present. Let him do the rest. And keep it daily. It doesn't have to be hours in devotion. You could sit outside and listen to music for 5 minutes if that's all you've got that day. Whatever you feel is worship, do that. You don't have to be extreme, just consistent. So in the wise words of Dory, just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Oh,
Dory.
I love to swim in